Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Natalie Marr, and I am here to help you learn to love your story.
Is for you, not for them. So that's going to be kind of the theme today. All right. Kind of the theme for these last four join us the first time, but we kind of pulled into two groups. I had like 8 items that happen to women during any kind of life change, or happen to people rather during any life change. It's kind of stages that we go through, and most certainly do happen to women during midlife and any kind of major role change in their life. And so the first 4 that we talked about last week were big changes. That's where it starts. Feeling insecure, feeling empty, and then having a lack of fulfillment. If you want to go back and watch that, you can fill yourself in on, how those things play out. And then what I introduced last week was this new way that I'm kind of putting the Learn to Love Your Story package in an acronym so that it's easier to remember. And my acronym is PLACES. So that's a personalized liberation through awareness, compassion, empowerment, and self-care. So today we're going to get into 4 more. So the last 4 that we're going to look at are a feeling of inadequacy, an idea or a sense that the future for us isn't bright, a sense of regret, and then a sense of grief. And I will kind of walk through these and help you understand how you might even use a couple of these as what I call rumble strips. So we'll get there. But if you know what a rumble strip is, if you're a driver, a rumble strip is that kind of that strip along the side of the highway when if you fall asleep or you're just drifting into the outside lane and you might go into a ditch, that strip kind of rumbles you to pull you back on the road. And I like that metaphor because I think that there are definitely, things that are signs in our life, but we might miss signs, right? You won't miss a rumble strip. You have to be real dead asleep in your life to miss a rumble strip. And so there are these things that happen to us that we get really frustrated about, that we're like, why is this showing up? It's so uncomfortable. It's so frustrating. And yet it actually has a really important function. I know it's a very therapist-y thing to say. All right, I will get started. So a sense of inadequacy, nobody has that, right? I had to juggle with how to pull insecurity and inadequacy apart because they're very similar. And I think that we think of them in a very similar way. So insecurity is really a form of anxiety. It's a form of being worried about a future sense of being inadequate. So something hasn't happened yet, but we are worried that it's happening. We're worried that, in the future, we're not going to be able to muster up. So that's what inadequacy is more about, taking kind of stock of what you are presently or have been and are presently doing and not thinking that musters up. So it's a little bit different, right? Insecurity is really a future-oriented worry. It hasn't happened yet. Inadequacy is more how I feel about myself right now is not mustering up to what I wanted it to be. So you can see how, in midlife transition, this particular feeling can be a bit of a rumble strip, right? When we start to feel like what we're doing isn't mustering up, that might be an indication that what we're doing isn't meant for us. If you're having that sense that life is not bringing you happiness, it's an indication that life has more in store for you, that there's something else that is in store for you. It is not an indication that you're doing anything wrong. And that, I think, is a real shift in thinking, because we've really been socially conditioned to kind of come back and look at ourselves and say, what am I doing wrong here, right? So like one of the ways, when I've worked with women one-on-one, one of the ways that I've seen kind of this midlife discomfort and dysphoria show up is when they come into my office and they start talking about things like, I try to do all the right mom things and I try to do all the right spouse things and I'm trying to fit in at work and I'm trying to do this. And I just feel like, what am I doing wrong? I should feel better. I'm doing it all right. What am I doing wrong that I don't feel better? And my answer usually is, I don't think you're doing anything wrong. I think what's wrong is what you're doing doesn't bring you happiness. And there's something else that's in store for you. So it's a real shift in our thinking, but it's a really wonderful rumble strip. It's super uncomfortable. You're not going to miss it. When you're not feeling adequate, right? Another way that you hear about this is imposter syndrome, right? So inadequacy and imposter syndrome are very similar. They're this idea that like, somebody's going to catch me. I don't have all the skills that I need to be doing what I'm doing. Somebody's going to catch me and figure out that I'm like just making this up as I go along. And that sense is really hard to miss in your life. You will feel it when you're feeling that way. What you want to try and do is now use that as a cue, as the rumble strip to cue you, if you're coming back on the highway, to start and use your skills, your awareness, your compassion, your empowerment, your self-care. Now, I would say with inadequacy, what we're really looking at is making self-empowered choices. And there's a step in making self-empowered choices that is that's a tricky one. It's actually one. I mean, I spend 4 weeks on it in my online course. I spend 4 weeks on it with my 20-week long group coaching packages that I've done for a good reason. It's all about learning what is the story I've been told to tell me how I'm supposed to be adequate. Where did I learn this idea that I'm supposed to feel good right now? I'm supposed to be happy with this right now. And really starting to deconstruct where you learn these things and if they serve you any longer. And that's a tricky thing to do in our lives, especially when you start to bump up against some social conditioning or family rules and conditioning. It's all those unsaid rules, right? Nobody wrote them down and said, you need to do this, this, and this to be a successful human. Well, we all kind of have an idea of this, and this makes a successful human, right? So I'm going to give you an example from my own life, and it's one that I use when I teach as well. But I've been twice divorced, right? And I grew up in a Catholic family. I do not aspire to be Catholic any longer. Recovering Catholic, I think, is what most of us call that when we're adults and we decide to leave that church. However, just to kind of give you family context, right? My family context was very specific. You marry, you stay married. There were marriages that lasted 70 some years in my family. Probably should not have lasted for 70 some years, but nobody was asking me. So there was this philosophy that you get married and you stay married. In the Catholic Church, when you get a divorce, you're not married. There's actually another religious step that they call an annulment if you really are going to make it, so that you never were married, whatever that means. Like, seems like some craziness that the church thinks it can say that, but whatever. So there was some real strong feelings that my family of origin had about divorce. And there's some real strong feelings about single moms and women being single and failed marriages being something that we did wrong and something that we failed at. There's a lot of that kind of construct that goes behind that. And I struggled really hard with that early after my first divorce. I really was like, wow, I'm going to have to get back on the wagon. I'm going to have to start dating again. I need to have a family. There's a certain way that this is supposed to look, and that will tell me that I'm doing it okay. So in my second marriage, there was a point at which this rumble strip was super uncomfortable for me because I wasn't happy. And I didn't understand what I was doing wrong, that I wasn't feeling happy. And I threw all of my best things at it. I was a clinical psychologist during the entirety of my second marriage. So knowing better doesn't mean that you don't see what you're doing to participate in your own suffering. And it really, in my, my wave of therapy after the dissolution of that particular marriage, was when I started to recognize I had been fighting the good fight for a role, for a story that I was told I was supposed to want, that I should love, that I would be happy with. And I wasn't. I'm really happy as a single parent. I'm really happy as a single person. It kind of is my jam. I didn't realize that was a choice. Like nowhere in any of my growing up had that been a choice. And so if you had told me somewhere along the line, well, make the self-empowered choice, Natalie, to just be single, there would be no way I could have just stepped into that. So while self-empowerment is the area that does help you cover this inadequacy, there's a lot of learning that goes into this. And there's a ton of compassionate self-awareness that you need to have to start to see like, oh, like the whole thing was stacked against me. This wasn't really anything I did wrong. It was that I didn't know there was more than one choice or more than a handful of choices. And so in not knowing that, I stepped into something really innocently that didn't serve me at all. And so really in midlife, what I want to do to help women is just give you the skill sets to see all of that so that you can make empowered choices about what works for you and doesn't. Because it certainly could have been that I just married two guys that didn't work for me, or I, had marriages that didn't work for me, and that marriage wasn't the thing that wasn't going to work for me, right? It turned out that was what didn't work for me. It wasn't the people. It was the fact that I didn't want to do that. That did not serve me to be doing that. But it could have been just as much that if I had looked at it all, it was something about the partners that I was choosing instead. So I am never going to sit across the couch or in a group coaching setting and tell you, oh, here's what you need to do. You just told me all these things, so let me just tell you, I can see it. Nope, that's not what I teach. What I teach is how to recognize what these things are. These rumble strips are telling you, you need to really test the waters of why is it that you feel inadequate about this? Because your whole biology is set up to take on anything. I want you to think about this for a minute. Your lungs have no idea what kind of air are going to hit them every day with every single breath you take. Yet the cells in your lungs are continually adapting, right? Allergens in the air, different stuff in the air that is not good for your body. They know how to put in a little mucus ball, make you cough it out, and it doesn't then go into your body. Hopefully, toxins don't go into your body. Same with food. Your body has no idea what you're going to choose to eat today or what is in the food that you're eating. And yet your body continually is able to adapt and digest and get what it needs from that and put into waste what it doesn't need. So your entire anatomy is wrapped around this very small principle of we can adapt to anything. You're right down to a cellular level. Your body is programmed to know how to do this. So what I think happens when we start to feel inadequate is it's an indication of a toxin of sorts mentally into our psyche, into our social being, into our interpersonal being, wherever it's showing up. And if we don't recognize that and do something about it to adjust around it, then we start to create dis-ease in our life or disease in our life. So this is kind of what I want you to be thinking. It really tests people. There's this idea that they've been drumming to the wrong drummer most of their life. For some of us, there's some icky feelings that we start to have, some resentment maybe that we start to have about that because families of origin, were pushing us to be a version of ourselves we're not. And there are some, versions of how this happens that get very oppressed, that we, make decisions to be a version of ourselves that society isn't so happy about. For me, I'd rather put you in a position of understanding you get to make the self-empowered choice to choose that for yourself and say that society's idea about that doesn't serve you. Doesn't mean it doesn't come with its own discomfort to choose that path for yourself. but it's a better space to feel like you're in than to think, I'm doing something wrong, that I'm not fitting into society's cookie cutter for what a female should do at this. That's where I would say self-compassionate awareness comes in. So I teach those two skills first, always. And I kind of even believe, honestly, that if you have those two skills, you don't really have to, learn the other things that I'm going to teach you, because you could kind of stumble into them on your own. Those are the real core skills to answering questions like that for yourself individually. Because I do believe, now I'm a clinical psychologist, and for those of you that, we're all just counselors and you don't know like kind of the distinctions. One of the main distinctions is a clinical psychologist is looking at this system. So only the individual, how I talk about the cellular level, that kind of thing. We're looking at that system and how it functions, not how it functions in relationship with other systems like your family, like a marriage and family therapist might, or a licensed clinical social worker might be looking more systemically at oppression and how are we kind of pushing against these cultural norms that don't seem to fit good, large portions of our society. I'm going to give you ideas of how to make those personal choices that can change and shift it for this system. And so what I'm hoping to be helping people do is have the skill sets to be aware how they've participated in their own suffering, and then make different choices so they're at least not themselves participating in their own suffering. That does not stop that society still sucks sometimes. That's just the reality. And so, yes, I believe in things like activism and, making big changes on a larger scale as well, but that's not what I teach about. And I'm real big on not telling you what the answer is. I think earlier in my career, like most of us as therapists want to help people, so we're giving lots of ideas all the time. The more tenured I became, the more clear it became to me that my version of what you should do is still my version and not your version. And so I need to teach you skills to create a version. I can certainly give you ideas of what those could be, but I won't assign those to my clients any longer. Not coaching clients, not in my teaching, not any of that, because I don't think that that's actually helpful. I think it can spiral into the very same thing, somebody else's idea of what you should be. Let me move on so we can get through some of these other ones. There's a couple of them that go together. So it's that we'll get through it all. Don't worry. But the next one in line is the future isn't bright. The future isn't bright, I think, is another less, it's less uncomfortable than feeling inadequate, right? Because you kind of feel like, well, things are okay. The future just isn't really bright for me, but I can handle this. This is a codependent statement if I've ever heard one. So I don't know if I said this in my last video, but my definition of codependency is pretty general. It is this idea of you, the person being codependent, taking care of everybody else's discomfort at your own expense. So nobody else has to feel uncomfortable, but you take that on so that things can stay status quo. And so a version of that is, I could handle that. My future is like, meh, but I'm okay with that. I can do that. Everybody else feels more comfortable if I'm in this meh existence, so I'll go with that. And you don't have to, and shouldn't have to go with that. So this idea of the future isn't bright might not mean like you're feeling like you did anything wrong, but you definitely have at least some discomfort in where you're at not being enjoyable. You're not feeling joy. You're not feeling happiness. You may not even be feeling contentment. You might be telling yourself a story that you're content, but it's more that you are tolerant of the life that you're in. So this is another version of kind of what inadequacy is telling you. It's that something about the life you're living isn't meant for you. So if happiness isn't here, your life is meant for something more. Like there's something else here for you. Not that you did anything wrong, just life is kind of giving you that this is not for you. You should not ever feel like you're just tolerating life. If you're feeling like you're tolerating life, you're in survival mode in your nervous system. And that can be fight and that can be flight, but it also can be freeze and it also can be fawn. And freeze and fawn are not as familiar to people, but it's like, freeze is, yeah, I just kind of stay here in a life that's not really good for me, but it's what I know. And fawn is more of that codependent behavior where you take that even a step further and take care of everybody else's needs to reduce as much conflict within what you're tolerating as you possibly can. So those are definitely things that women are conditioned to do, period, not just in midlife, but across in Western cultures. And so these are definitely things that become a version of a rumble strip for you to start asking yourself the question, is this really serving me? I later this week, I'm hoping to release a video of my last group cohort. And they were such wonderful ladies. And one of them, in her testimonial, she talks about this. She says that she's like, well, I thought Learn to Love Your Story was a little woo when I first heard the name. And I was like, okay, you can get whatever you think. And she said, but the reason was I didn't think I didn't love my story. That's not what I thought I was struggling with. I thought I was okay with my life where it was, but this is what was happening to her. It was like, oh, but I'm staring down the barrel of 20 more years of the same, which is, meh, it's okay. But, something feels like it's missing for me. But I also, have all these cultural norms that tell me that's okay, though. You just tolerate that. If you look on the outside, this is a great life. So just be happy for what you have because you're not, tormented over here with these other problems that other people have. And so even this idea of the future isn't bright is enough of an inkling to me as a clinician that you should be starting to take a look at these programs and conditions and social and cultural norms and all of that stuff, all the unsaid rules that tells you tolerating a life is okay. It's not, it's surviving, but it's not thriving. It's not living. And we're designed to thrive and live and have pleasure, or we wouldn't have all of those mechanisms within this organism. Oh, I love that question. Are you participating in your own suffering? Well, it feels uncomfortable. I totally get that. It feels uncomfortable. However, it switches the agency. So you stop being a victim of your circumstances and you start being an agent within your circumstances. So the next one is regret. And regret is one of my favorites, actually. So regret is a great rumble strip, like a really, really great rumble strip for what we're doing here is not the dream we want to be in. And if we're regretting at something, that's likely the dream. Okay. So if you think about it like this, you're, in your life, you're regretting you didn't make a choice to open up your own business, right? Or you're regretting you didn't decide to get married or have a partner. It is likely that something about that place is what is the real dream for you. Doesn't mean it has to look like that. Doesn't mean you even can make it look like that, right? If we've participated in our suffering for some period of time, our choices are different in those moments. Regret will point you in a direction of doing something for yourself, but you may not be able to do the exact thing. Like I cannot be 20 something again and just have had children and stayed single and not have 2 divorces. That doesn't actually get to be a thing. It's not a choice for me anymore. What is a choice is I can be like, no, not interested in any of that. And so I will just enjoy my life from here going forward. So regret is really interesting in that it's pointing in the direction of the thing that really is something that's meaningful for you. These other ones that we've talked about are pointing in the direction of somebody else has an idea about you and you're not quite sure yet what yours is. If you're staying compassionately self-aware in your regret, it will tell you exactly the direction that you want to be going for yourself. Regret is going to point us towards the thing that we want, whereas things like feeling inadequate or being complacent are pointing us to what others wanted for us, right? So regret is pointing in the direction of what our real dream is. And even if we can't attain the dream as it, originally was, that exactly what we wanted or are regretting, we certainly can take elements of that and honor them moving forward. And even that is in the right direction, away from the place of feeling regretful and feeling stagnant or stuck in your life. All right. So grief is not an emotion. Grief is a set of emotions that wrap around significant change or change really of any kind, loss, and really it's part of the given, right? So part of the human contract is you're born and you die. Can't get out of that contract, right? But the other part of the human contract that we are not really good about talking about is you're born, you change, adapt, change, and die. And all of that change comes with you say goodbye to one thing and hello to another thing. Always, always, always. And grief and understanding grief is really about learning how to navigate that well. It's funny, right? Like different industries sometimes are doing very parallel things and don't realize it. But the industry of growth mindset, which is more in like human resources and work-based things, and we're teaching employees to have this growth mindset and always be open-minded. That set of skills is the very same set of skills that I teach people around how to be better grievers, how to be better ready for facilitating change in their life. But grief it's not a rumble strip. It's just part of the contract. Grief is doing well, saying goodbye and saying hello, and being in a state of flow in your life that allows you to do that instead of resisting it and holding on to it, where that starts to bring the suffering. So if something is changing and you're all focused on, I don't want it to change, that's resisting it. But what's ironic is when we resist something, we think we're pushing it away from us. We're actually pulling it right into our laps. It absorbs us, and that's all we're thinking about, is that we aren't going to have the thing we want. Something is changing and we aren't going to have the thing we want. And instead, if you can, think of grief as your vehicle for learning to get back into your thriving living mode and away from that survival mode, that is going to serve you way better. So it's normal to feel sad and to feel like bargaining and to feel like angry, and all the emotions that go into our stages of grief. It is super normal. And you just feel them and keep moving. You don't feel them and resist them, which actually pulls them towards you. That's where we get stuck. And we get stuck in our grief when we start to push away the concept of that change has to happen, loss has to happen. I have to actually move around, this big hole in my life now. That's the part that we get a little bit entrenched into. So here's a way to shift your perspective a little bit. There are parts of grief that are the loss that we don't bring with us, but there are parts of grief that are highlighting the parts that we do bring with us, but we bring it with us differently, right? So let me kind of use your example here. We get into this, our brain gets into this funk because it likes to categorize things. And so if something brings us discomfort, it likes to it lumps it into this is not good. But this is kind of that place where, humans can hold paradox, that something can be good and not good at the same time, can feel, painful and be joyful at the same time, which is what I'm sure those meditations are trying to help you to hold the space for. But, the aspects of your old job, for instance, that you were really good at are aspects of you that go with you. So they aren't only tied to the experience you had in that job. They are tied to you and they go with you. So what you're experiencing in your loss is, I can't do it there anymore, but I do still have this aspect to myself that I bring with me forward. The same thing with your, puppy. Not a puppy, but your animals that passed away. They don't come with you, but the parts of you that attach to them is still with you and still has the capacity to keep doing that going forward. I think one of the most paradoxical concepts of all time, and this is why philosophers and religion get all over it, is love. Love does not operate in a analytical form. It isn't like you have a pie and this is how much love you get at the beginning of life, and you just have to separate little pieces of pie and give it to the different things that you decide to give it to. It's like each and everything that joins our life, we exponentially have more capacity to love. How does that work? Our analytical brains don't really know how to wrap our minds around that, but that is, in fact, how that operates. I think the part that's, we still kind of get teary about is we couldn't have had that aspects to ourselves, though. We couldn't have had that growth without the experience that facilitated it. And those things aren't coming with us. We are here. Those things aren't coming with us. And so, that's where humans are just amazing in that they can hold space for things that seem seemingly opposite to be true at the same time, that there can be multiple truths at the same time. But there's a lot in our culture. Well, culture doesn't teach about grief at all and loss at all in a healthy way. Western culture, I should say, American culture, we're kind of taught that it's lumped with loss, and loss is bad, lumped with change bad. So we start to think about it as a bad thing. But grief is really, it's just the vehicle. It's just the journey. It's not an actual destination. It's not an actual thing. It's just a process that we bring with us through all of our life that really makes us be more skillful. And if you have any experience with things like growth mindset and you start to look at the two, you're like, holy crud, those are the same things. And industries do this all the time. We think we're being unique and teaching one thing and then another. It's the same thing. Yeah. I have no idea when the next one of these will be because I don't plan 3 weeks out of my life most of the time. I've been putting together the package for my next group coaching, which is going to be 10 weeks long and start in October. And you'll start to see me put stuff out about that on social media in the next week. If you're interested at all, I can send you a link to set up a phone call with me and I can talk to you about it more individually. I don't want to take up people's time here for that. But if you're interested, I'm more than happy to send you a link for that. And those are paid services versus what I do here for free. But I will do a coffee with Dr. Natalie for free every month. And so just, if you follow me on social media, just keep watching and you'll see it. Or if you're on my email list, you'll get, in my emails, you'll always see when my next one is coming up, and just make sure that you're signed up and you'll get the emails about it.